These are the 5 most common strategies Kiwis use to become property millionaires. And you're about to learn what they are and what it takes to use them. And that includes how fast you can make $1 million and exactly how many deals you'd need to become a property millionaire. That way, by the end of this video, you'll know which strategy you'll use to make your first million.
Now, how do you make $1 million through property? And I'm talking about $1 million in today's money, cash in hand, after tax. Well, there are 5 main property investing strategies that I see Kiwis use. So I want to go through all of them today, rank them by the number of deals you need to do, the time it's going to take, the tax you'd have to pay, because the truth of the matter is, it is all wildly different, right? And I'll just say at the start of this episode, all of the numbers we talk about in today's show are inflation adjusted, today's money, unless we say otherwise. Cool. What's option 1, Andrew?
So option number 1's kind of the traditional way of investing in property, which is the buy and hold or the build and hold. So you buy $1 million property, really easy numbers. You take out $1 million worth of debt to buy that property. And let's say you have a capital growth of 5% per year on average over 15 years. Based on those numbers, at 5% growth over 15 years, the property will double in value in that period of time. Now, once you factor in for the agent's fee, when you sell the property, say 5%, that means after you've paid back that mortgage, you've created $974,000 or $975,000 worth of cash. Now, if you think about that with inflation added into the equation, now you're closer to $670,000 worth of real cold hard cash.
So what you'd actually need to do is hold on to that property for 22 years and you'd get to that $1 million. Now, a couple of other ways to do it. Rather than buying a $1 million house with $1 million mortgage, you could always just buy 2 properties and call it 2 $600,000 properties. So 1.2 mil all up, 1.2 mil worth of debt. Let's say it goes up by 5% per year. Then we'd only need to hold those properties for about 19 years in order to get that, maybe slightly over, maybe 18 years. That's probably the simplest way to make $1 million out of property, right? Buy a property with a large mortgage, wait for it to go up in value. There's no capital gains tax. So by the time you get there, sweet as, we've made our $1 million based on those numbers. What about cash flow? Cash flow is the next one, right?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one when you do the numbers. And the reason people think about this is because capital growth often gets referred to as speculative, but cash flow, you can kind of quantify that at the start. So people go, I want to get cash flow now. I want to be able to enjoy my properties, not in 19 years' time, not in 15 years' time, today. So if you want to earn $1 million from rental income, let's look at a property worth $1 million and no mortgage at all. So the difference here is you're going to have $1 million to do this, right? The net yield that we work on, so your gross yield minus your cost, so your net yield, we use 4%. And then
that's pretty standard, isn't it? That'd have to be like a gross yield of about 6%.
Yeah,
then once you minus your rates, your maintenance, your insurance, you'd probably get down to about that 4%. So that's the actual cash flow, which means that you're pulling out about 40 grand per year before tax.
Yeah. And now if you're paying tax of 33%, then you're going to be about $27,000 after you've paid your tax obligations. Now, $27,000, that's great. We've had to have $1 million to start. We've had to have that in the bank, but we know that we've got that money guaranteed to come in. But if you want $1 million, you've got to wait 37 years before you've built that up in that cash flow.
And that's assuming that your post-tax cash flow is going up with inflation as well. But 37 years if we're ignoring any sort of capital growth there, right?
And I've had to have the $1 million. That's the big thing for me.
It's quite a lot. Okay, so that's strategy number 2. The third strategy is flipping. Now, how do the numbers typically work on this?
Okay, so with a flip, you've got a house purchase, so that might be, say, 600 grand because we want a more affordable property. The renovation is normally going to be, say $60,000. That'd be a relatively strict budget there. You want to have some uplift in value, otherwise what the hell are you doing it for? So let's say the final value is $750.
So that means that you're spending $60,000 on the renovation and the property's going up by an additional $90,000. Now, typically we work on a one in, one out basis. So you spend 60 grand on a renovation, maybe the property might go up by $120,000. So you're making your renovation money back plus that again. Here I've actually been more generous in the numbers and said, let's say it goes up by $90,000, okay? But there's still going to be some sales costs, right, in there?
So you take off your sales costs, again 5%. Your pre-tax profit is $52,500. That sounds great. But then because you are flipping properties, you have to pay your income rate on the profit. So let's say that's 33%. I noticed you haven't factored in holding costs or anything like that.
I've just assumed that's in the renovation
Kept it
budget,
really
but you
simple.
might have an additional line item there, right? Because you might have a mortgage for 3 months that you're doing it.
Yeah. So your post-tax margin is $35,000. Now, the number of transactions you'd have to do to make that $1 million is 28. Now, that's if all 28 of them get this kind of return. If you did 4 flips a year and they all went perfectly, that's 7 years. So basically, you probably have to have a job still because you want to borrow the money. But that's one every quarter. It's quite a lot.
It is. I mean, that's the maximum that we often say that an investor could do on top of their full-time job, right? Now, some people do replace their income by doing flips. But here we're talking about what would you need to do in order to make the $1 million. And what we're saying here is you'd have to do about 4 flips per year for just over 7 years. So somewhere between 28 to 29 in total in order to make that $1 million of wealth.
And I think because if you don't have a personal job, this becomes your full-time job, well, actually that money, that profit ends up getting spent on lifestyle, and therefore you don't have the $1 million at the end of 7 years.
That's where you'd need to do 7 to 8 flips per year, right? And that'd allow you to spend the $100,000 in terms of your income, and then on top of that, do the 4 flips per year in order to start building up that wealth, right? But the thing we always say, I'm going to steal your line, is you can only sell a property once, right? And you kind of see that in this example, where in order to build up that $1 million worth of wealth, you have to sell a property 28 times. With the first example, you only had to sell a property once. The other thing you've got to factor in is some of those flips aren't going to go wrong, right? They're not all going to be exactly 52.5 grand worth of pre-tax profit.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that people don't realize. Like you can have some flips that get advertised online and people make a really good margin, and that's awesome. And absolutely, I've seen people make some really good margins. But then there are other ones, like there's a very experienced real estate agent that I was talking to the other day. He made nothing on his latest flip. And so, right? and then if he even was honest with himself and looked at the holding costs and the time that it took him, he's actually backwards.
And if you're finding these useful, make sure you hit the like button, because that's how we know which videos to do more or less of. Hitting subscribe, that helps too. You guys have already helped us build this into the largest property investing community in the country, and we are well on our way to our goal of 50,000 subscribers. Now, the next strategy I want to talk about is subdividing. Talk to me about this one.
Okay, so let's say you don't start out by saying, right, I'm going to be a land banker, I'm going to buy up a bunch of land and start subdividing it. You start a little bit easier. So you might buy a property that's got some extra land on it. So there's a house, so you've got some revenue coming in. Say $600,000 on that. Subdivision cost might be $150,000. And I know we've got an episode that's just recently come out on what the real cost might be.
The subdivision costs are so much higher than anybody anticipates that they're going to be, right?
Yeah, if you're really honest with the numbers and think about holding costs, your final value could be kind of $900,000. So again, using that model we typically use, if you spend $1, you want $2 worth of value increase. Sales cost, 5%. So your pre-tax profit is, in this example, is $105,000. And if you're paying 33 cents in the dollar in tax, your post-tax margin is $70,000. So it's great, good amount of money. But again, to get that $1 million, you've got to do 14 of these and they've all got to go this well.
And then on top of that, if you're going to do it, subdivisions take way longer than a standard renovation, because a subdivision could take, if it's simple, 6 months. If it's more complex, it could take you 9 months or even more. And so you might only be able to do 2 subdivisions per year. Now, the good news with those is you're not going to be there necessarily painting walls or doing this land surveying yourself or digging the ditch to connect up the electricity, right? So it might be a little more hands-off compared to a standard flip, but it's still going to take you 7 years doing 2 subdivisions per year, right? The thing that I just mentioned here is that the tax side of subdivisions becomes way more complex. So if you own your own home, you've lived in it for a couple of years, and you're just subdividing off the back section, well, you might not need to pay tax under the bright line test because that was your own home, right? So you use the own home exemption. If you're doing it with an investment property, all of a sudden it becomes much more complicated. So you'd want to make sure you're getting some good tax advice around this. But in this example, we're saying that you are subdividing with the intention of selling it off in order to make this $1 million. And so you'd likely fall under the intention test here.
Yeah, and that's actually probably quite a good point. When I think about some of these active strategies, people can sometimes fall into the trap of becoming tainted because of their activity buying and selling properties. Now, that will affect not only the active side of your investing, but also potentially your passive. So say you did one of each of these things and you think, well, that first one I've got, the buy and hold, there's no tax on that. Well, there might be. If you become tainted, there might be a tax on that. So you've got to be really careful.
And that's because we've got an intention-based system in New Zealand, right? Where if the IRD thinks that your intention is to buy a property, sell it years later for more money, then you might need to pay tax on that. Now, it's really hard to prove intention. And so what they'll do is, well, if you're doing lots of flips here, there, and everywhere, all of these other properties, doesn't matter if you had the intention of holding them for the long term just to make rental income, they might start taxing you on that as well. We've got some great episodes on the Property Academy podcast about that. But let's come to the final strategy, which people sometimes want to turn their hand to, which is property development. What do the numbers look like on this?
Yeah, so we have done some stuff on this in the past, but just digging down into kind of a realistic model right now. So with development, it's a little bit more complicated because there's another layer of tax there. There's GST as well. So we've worked on a 750 gross sale price, which once you take the GST off, works out to be $652,000. That's what you're going to get to keep. And then let's say that your pre-tax net margin, just keep it really simple, so your margin on the development is 10%. Now,
is that pretty standard, or what would you say?
That works out to be a pre-tax profit per unit of about 65 grand. That's pretty good in this market, to be honest.
Okay. And so if you're doing that, you're going to have to pay income tax on that. And if you're doing a development, it's going to be pretty quickly that you get tipped over into the top tax bracket. So I think we need to use a 39% tax rate there, which means per unit you're making just under $40,000. That's pretty good, isn't it?
That's pretty good, given that you're probably doing lots of them. Now, if you're thinking about the number of units that you have to do to get that $1 million, still 25. That number surprised me as well. And I guess, again, this is because we're thinking about, okay, we've got a single transaction. Now, if you do, I don't know, 5 developments of 5 units, okay, well, that makes it sound a little bit easier. But again, all of those have to go well.
Well, if you're starting out, it's really interesting to understand, well, how long would it take you to start out? Because you're not going to start by doing 25 unit development, townhouse development, right? If this is your very first one, you might do a 2, 3, or 4 townhouse development, right? That's going to take you 12 to 14 months from consent to settlement. Then what you might need to do is recycle the money you made out of that development into the next one. And now you're doing a 6 townhouse development. That's going to take you 24 months. Then you recycle your money out and then you move into the next one, right? So it's not like you're able to just do, that's easy. Let's do a 25 unit development straight away. But if you were to do, say, 5 units per year, then that would mean that you're at about 5 years to make that $1 million, assuming that you're not just keeping on recycling that over and over again, right?
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things with these more active strategies is the number of years really matters, because the more years that you have to rely on the market being good, the more exposed you are to the market going up or down.
And the thing that's really interesting here, right, is that if we look at all of these 5 strategies, it's really surprised me that some of these kind of sexy, really active strategies like flipping, to make that $1 million, you do think, gosh, 28 flips or 25 flips and doing it over 7 years to make the same amount of money if I just did a buy and hold and held it for a bit longer and just never thought about it. Now, I'm not saying to anybody, hey, look, don't go and do flips or don't do developments or don't do subdivisions, right? But what this has made me think is perhaps we discount the more boring long-term strategies of just buy and hold. We then are able to get those gains out tax-free based on the current rules than the rules that we've had for the last 100 or so years in New Zealand. And maybe you only need 2 properties to make your $1 million over the long term, rather than doing 25, 28 flips over a period of 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, and I say for most people, my advice generally would be do the boring stuff that's probably a bit more certain in terms of the potential outcome over a long period of time. Do that first. And then once you've achieved what you want to achieve, i.e. I've got my 3 properties, I know if even they go up by 4% a year, I'm going to have my $1 million later on. Then do whatever you want to. That's the sexy stuff, because if you make nothing from it, it's okay. You've still got this as your backup plan.
It's definitely made me think that if you get that base sorted, then you can use a hybrid strategy where you do flipping as well. Because I know that you've worked in the past with people who have done more active strategies, and then they do it for 10 years, and then they look and say, well, how much wealth do I actually have? Because as I've gone along the way, I might have had a great income, but I've spent that wealth that I made.
Do you know, I reckon that only 5% of developers that I've worked with have been happy with the number of properties that they've kept along the way. Most of them say, God, I wish I'd kept more.
So now you know the 5 strategies to make $1 million through property, but before you go all in on any of these strategies, you need to answer these 6 questions first, because if you answer yes to any of those 6 questions that I go through in this next video, then don't invest in property. Click the video on screen and watch it now.